those businesses, in this case today, childcare facilities, open safely and effectively while helping us to continue to reduce the spread of COVID-19. That's the whole purpose of the webinar today, is to share best practices for how we continue to flatten the curve. So today we invited Heather Hicks, Director for the Southeast Tennessee Child Care Resource and Referral Network, Ariel Ford, Deputy Director of the City of Chattanooga's Youth and Family Development Department, and our Director of Early Learning, and Angela Hayes, our Early Learning Business Navigator, to have a dialogue with us about the recommendations and best practices for childcare facilities to help us further mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So let's start with some introductions. So let's start with Heather, then we'll go to Ariel, then we'll go to Angela.
Good morning, everybody. It's really great to see that you're on this morning. As Jermaine says, I am the director for the statewide Child Care Resource and Referral Network, and I'm happy to bring you information today for guidance on reopening safely.
All right, perfect. Ariel?
Hey guys, I'm so glad to see everybody on here today. I was just texting, oh my gosh, we have 166 people on here. I think that's a testament to this community and our desire to keep our families and children safe and the relationships that y'all have built. So I'm super excited to learn from Heather and learn alongside you.
All right, and last but not least, Angela Hayes. Oh, Angela, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, I'm still on mute?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning, good morning. And again, just as Heather and Ariel have communicated, I am super, super excited to be a part of this discussion, and just always very grateful for what you all bring to the table in terms of supporting our children, supporting our families, and supporting our community.
All right, thank you all. So thank you, Heather, Ariel, and Angela. So we thought we would just have a dialogue today, so let's jump right into the material. I am going to shut up and let the experts take it from here. So we're going to start with Heather, and then Heather will start with her presentation, and then after Heather concludes her presentation, we'll have time for more of a dialogue and some Q&A from all of you guys who are tuning in. All right, Heather, I'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is reopening childcare safely. And I want you to know that all the information that's presented in this presentation that I'm sharing with you is based on the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education's guidance that was released statewide on April 30th of 2020. The Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, and the Department of Health all work together to come up with this guidance. And one of the things that I would like for you to note is that this is guidance, which means it's giving you tools to use in your toolbox to help keep your families and children safe as you're working. So what that means is these are not rules and they're not mandatory, but it's good practice that you're going to want to consider as a business owner, and what you need to use to make sure everybody is safe as we move forward in reopening. Each of you makes your own decision about whether or not to be open or closed based on your unique situations, and everybody's aware of that, and we're just really hopeful that the information presented today with some links that are going to come out later afterwards for you to, as was mentioned, you really need to look into everything and make the best decision for you as a business owner. So what we're going to talk about today, am I sharing? I'm sharing. I'm not advancing. Oh, here we go. So basically, today I'm going to be talking about three very specific things. I'm going to be talking about procedures that you might want to consider as you reopen, personal protective equipment, or sometimes you might hear that referred to as PPE. And I'm also going to be talking to you about making sure you're in contact with your local program evaluator throughout the process. And especially if you have any questions about what you need to do or what you want to do and how licensing rules may or may not come into effect while you're doing those. I want you to know that everything that the Department of Education, the Department of Human Service, and the Department of Health use to come up with their guidelines comes from the CDC, as well as Caring for Our Children. And then some of the pieces came from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which also will refer you back to the CDC. So I say that because everywhere you look, if you start doing your research, is going to push you back to the CDC. So anyway, let's get going on this. All right, so one of the first things you're going to want to really consider as you're reopening is limiting the people who are in your facility. And so what that means is you want to make sure that the people in your facility are who you need to have in there. So you're going to want to make sure that, with the exception of your staff, you want your staff to come in the building. Anybody who has legal authority needs to enter your building, and that would include law enforcement officers, child care licensing, or child protective services staff. You are going to want those people in your building. Anybody providing professional services to the children in your building will be allowed into your facility. Any children that are enrolled in the facility, of course, you're going to want to allow in. And parents or legal guardians who have children enrolled and present at the facility would be people you want to consider to let in the building. Anybody else, you might want to consider whether or not you allow them in the building during this time. Another piece you want to think about is your pickup and drop off protocols. So as children are coming back, how are you going to have them in the building? How are you going to pick them up from their families? So one of the recommendations is that the pickup occurs outside of the facility, meaning that somebody is assigned to pick up the children from the families as they're being dropped off. If there is a legitimate need to have a family or a parent drop a child off in the facility, you're of course going to do that and make that happen. You might want to consider having hand hygiene stations set up at the entrance of your facility with supervised use to make sure that hand washing and sanitation is happening before coming into the building. You might want to consider staggering the arrival and drop-off times that children come, so not everybody's coming at the same time. You may also want to consider having staff outside, definitely, at the facility to pick up the children as they arrive. You may want to consider making sure that it's the same staff that's always doing that process, so that children and families are used to seeing that person, and that you're reducing the interaction with other people. You're going to need to have a screening plan in place for when people are coming into your building. This is for your staff. This is for the children. This is for anybody else who would be coming into your building. The number one piece to remember is that anyone with a fever of 100.4 or above, or has any sign of illness, should not be admitted into your facility. It's really important that we continue to encourage our parents to be alert for any signs of illness that are happening with their children, and making sure that we keep them home when they're sick. That's your general policy anyway, and so it's one that we want to keep in place. Screening your staff and children upon arrival if it's possible. Requiring your staff to report any illness to their supervisor, as well as notify you if they have a COVID-19 positive case in their household. You're going to want to know that information. And then the CDC has a list of methods that you can visit to check on for screening methods. Check the CDC for which one will work best for your facility. And we're going to have that link posted at the end of that. So then we have to think about, all right, our children are coming back. What does that mean? Do we let them all come back at the same time? You know, we've been told that we need to limit for under 10. We need to keep our numbers down. So we really need to have policies in place that limit our class sizes, as well as how we mix children up when they're in the class. So all efforts, as much as possible, should be made to keep your class size 10 or less. Your groupings should include, as much as possible, the same children in each day to reduce the likelihood of exposure. So making sure that the same children are together as much as possible. Limit the mixing of children. So for example, staggering playground time, so not so the same children are on the playground at the same time, keeping groups separate for arts and music, as well as exercising, keeping the same children keeping the same teachers with the children and with each other as much as possible. And it's important to clean and disinfect equipment between groups whenever possible. So we're really looking at how to have reopened with limiting our class sizes. So when we're getting into the conversation of PPE or protective equipment, face mask is one of the pieces that we're all looking at. So the CDC recommends that staff members and older children should wear face mask coverings within the facility if at all possible. It's important that those are cloth coverings, that we never put them on children under the age of 2 because of dangerous suffocation. And so what I want to say around this is we understand that face mask on children is not always realistic. You do not want to keep fighting children, and by fighting I mean making them put the face mask on. They're going to continue to touch their face. You're going to be touching their face, which opens up the opportunity to have contamination. So the recommendation is you can try a face mask. If it doesn't work, we understand it's not going to work. You have to do what's best for children. If you choose as a business owner to make face masks with children one of your policies, that is your choice. One of the things you have to understand is that you will be spending a lot of time trying to get the face mask back on a child. And you will not have children who have any sort of difficulty with breathing wearing a mask. You have to consider those pieces. And as children nap, they should not be wearing a mask because safe sleep is very important. So again, as a business owner, it's your decision about whether or not you have children wear the mask. You just need to think about what that's going to look like and what that means for your staff, working with children wearing the mask and keeping children wearing the mask. Now, some agencies across the city and across the state are choosing to do that. They're just trying to make sure that the kids wear them. I think they're having older children tended to wear them with less issue than younger children. But this is just it's a recommendation, and it's something for you to consider. But you also understand what's realistic. Okay. Sick children. So one of the things we need to, again, really make sure is that sick children do not come into the facility. But if a child is sick while they are at the facility, again, this is what you already have in your policy, but making sure to contact the parent or guardian immediately and separating that child from the other children in the facility, and making sure that your contact information for families is up to date, because that can change depending on if they've had to move or if they've changed phone numbers, those things. So making sure that your emergency contact information is up to date and you continue with your policy of separating sick children. Making sure to have a plan if a child becomes sick while they are at the facility. So consider having an isolation room or some area where that child can be separated from other children. Making sure that you're going to follow the CDC guidelines on disinfecting your building or your facility when somebody becomes sick. If the child's been isolated, making sure that you're cleaning all those surfaces as well as any bedding or any other thing that the child has come in contact with, and making sure that they go home. And the same goes with your staff. If they should become sick or with symptoms that are similar to COVID-19, that they also go home. Really evaluate your leave policies to make sure that you follow the guidelines. One of the things that I think is important to understand is that covered employees and employers need to be aware of the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which allows for paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave for reasons such as self-quarantining or seeking medical diagnosis for COVID-19. So if you have a staff member who should become sick with COVID-19, there are some federal guidelines in place to make sure that they have some paid leave around that. All right, so let's say we have a confirmed case of a child or a staff member who becomes sick. It's really important that all areas that that person came in contact with is cleaned. Opening all outside doors and windows can increase air circulation in areas. You're going to want to wait up to 24 hours or as long as possible before you clean or disinfect to allow any sort of respiratory droplets to settle before cleaning and disinfecting, because this is a respiratory airborne illness. You're going to clean and disinfect all those areas such as offices, bathrooms, your common areas. If it's been more than 7 days since that person who was sick visited or used the facility, additional and cleaning and disinfecting is not necessary. Do not allow any children or staff members to return except as recommended by their medical provider. So you're going to want to make sure that they have clearance to come back. Toys. So we know that children play with toys. They touch a lot of toys. They slobber on their toys. They touch their toys. They experiment and check them out, putting them in their mouth. The recommendation is that if your toy cannot be cleaned and sanitized, it should not be out for use. It should not be something that children have access use. Toys that have been placed in a mouth or otherwise contaminated by body fluids and excretions need to be set aside and cleaned by hand with a person who is wearing gloves. Clean everything with water and detergent, rinse and sanitize with your EPA registered disinfectant, rinse it again and air dry it. You can also clean in a mechanical dishwasher. Be mindful of items more likely to be placed in the mouth, like play food, dishes, and utensils, and making sure that they come out of rotation as soon as it comes out of the mouth. Machine washable toys should be used by one individual at a time or should not be used at all. So for example, if I play with a machine washable toy, I'm not going to let Ariel play with it right after I do. I'm going to take it right out of rotation and I'm going to make sure it's laundered before Ariel or Brooke or anybody else plays with that toy. I'm not going to share toys with other groups of infants or toddlers until they've been washed and sanitized. So we want to make sure before moving toys from group to group that they are clean and sanitized. I'm going to set aside any sort of toys that need to be sanitized. Consider having your yuck bucket available or whatever you choose to call it, and place those toys in a dish pan with soapy water in a separate container. Keep that out of reach of children to prevent risk of drowning. I know that we know that, but we just need to say it. Washing with soapy water is really ideal method for cleaning, and try to have enough toys so that they can be rotated in and out during the cleaning process. When it comes to children's books, any paper products such as mail or envelopes or anything considered for a high risk transmission do not need additional cleaning. Are not considered high risk. So you can have books out and paper for children to draw with. Those will not require additional cleaning or disinfecting. So let's talk about bedding. We want to make sure that we use bedding that can be washed. I know that we do that already. Keeping children's bedding separate and and separate from each other, making sure that it's in their individual bins or cubbies or bags, making sure the cots and mats are labeled for each child, and any bedding that touches a child's skin should be cleaned weekly or before used by another child. Excuse me. I do know that there are some areas that are making sure that they have 2 sets of bedding per child. So one sheet or whatever is being used is being washed daily. So some people are taking that additional step to make sure that sanitation of bedding is happening. A lot of this is what you already have in your policies and is required by our licensing organizations, but this is just a reminder. One of the other things that we need to remember to do during this time as we begin to reopen, and we begin to reopen according to federal, state, and our local regulations, is to make sure that we're staying in contact with our program evaluators. They've been making phone calls to all licensed agencies to check in and see where you are in the process, as well as gather additional information. So please be sure to keep in contact with them and let them know a change in your progress as far as reopening or if you're staying closed. They are going to be able to really explain to you how monitoring and compliance will be determined for the immediate future. And they can discuss with you any continuing challenges and impacts that you feel like you're going to face. And this will also better inform the department on the needs of you, the child care community, as they come up. So I really want to encourage you to stay in contact with your program evaluator. If you have additional questions or need additional help, you can always contact your local CCR&R, the one here in the Southeast. I've given you the phone number and the website. You can go on the website and look up under Southeast, and all the coaches, the CCR&R coaches' emails are available if you need to have that information. And that is all that I have to talk to you about. I feel like I went really fast because we just have a short amount of time, and I want to give you opportunity to ask questions. But that is what we have. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Heather. We really appreciate it. Great presentation, lots of valuable information. Before we sort of jump into the questions from our audience, Ariel, I wanted to give you an opportunity to add anything if there was anything that you felt like we needed to make sure that we covered before we get to Q&A. And then Angela, we'll come over to you right after that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add has nothing to do with actually reopening, but I think it's important for us to just acknowledge how hard this is going to be and the difficulties that each and every one of you is going to face as we move into reopening more fully. There are financial implications, there are emotional implications, there are practical implications, and I think, we're just going to have to keep taking deep breaths and learning together and reaching out to one another to learn. So this is a step one. It's certainly not the last step. So that's the only thing I wanted to add. But I also really appreciate, Heather, thank you for saying, please don't make a baby, our little 3-year-olds cry all day trying to keep a mask on them. I think we have to balance the physical responsibility and emotional responsibilities. And that's what our developmentally appropriate practice teaches us. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I just want to say real quick before, Angela, I don't mean to jump on in front, but you bring up a really good point, Ariel, and children, the social emotional piece is something that we still have to really remember and consider, and you're still going to want to hug children and touch children and be there with them. And there are ways to do that, that it has to happen. We cannot stop doing that piece. So washing your hands, wearing a smock, anything that can come off and be washed are just additional ways for you to protect yourself. But yes, we have got to attend to the social emotional and not forget that.
All right, perfect. Angela, did you want to add anything else? Okay. We can come back to Angela. Let me go ahead and start looking at some of the questions from our viewers. So it looks like the first question that came in is there going to be a recording of this sent to all the participants? Yes, we always make our webinars available after the fact to people who want to view it. And we will also make sure that we post a link to our website in case people want to view it afterwards. And it looks like I've got. Did I see Angela come back? All right, no worries. All right, and then our second question is, what's your recommendation for staff with asthma? We've already received this question from one of our teachers. Heather, I will start with you, and then I may have a little something to add on that one.
So I think the recommendation or something to consider is if you have staff members that have a health condition or something that would be a high risk, is to perhaps find other ways that they can help, other areas they can be in perhaps. And this is just some ideas. I'm not saying this is what you have to do, but consider maybe having that person, when it's time to clean the toys, they're focused on that, or they're focused on being at the front door to make sure the door is open. Finding alternate ways for them to help in the classroom, to help reduce their risk of becoming sick. So I think it's as a business owner, it's your choice to find a way to make sure that they can still participate. It's going to be hard to wear a mask with asthma, so that's something that you need to take into consideration with your employee.
Yeah, and I'll just add that in looking at some of the Tennessee Pledge guidelines that the governor's office has put out regarding different business types, we are still very much sort of considered in phase one of our reopening. And so people who have pre-existing conditions that could put them at risk for serious illness from the disease, as well as people who may be over the age of 65, are really not recommended to sort of be active participants in this restart or reopening. So I do want to make sure that that is clear to people. Now, I realize that that may pose other questions that employers will have to answer or address. But keep in mind that in most of the language that has come out that we've seen so far, people with pre-existing conditions or people who are over the age of 65 or people who are just more vulnerable to developing serious illness are still encouraged to work from home as much as possible. And so now it looks like we've got, let's look at our sort of second question here. Should the staff monitoring the sick child have some type of PPE? Heather, I think that one's for you.
Yes, absolutely. You should have some sort of PPE. Again, it's your decision about whether or not you have PPE for the whole staff. I think it would be probably a good decision. Thinking about these as tools in your toolbox. At the end of the day, we have to think about how to protect the children as well as the staff. And as long as staff is wearing a mask, that is helping them from, that's a barrier for them as well. So I think, yes, you're going to absolutely want to make sure somebody is wearing PPE when monitoring a sick child.
All right, perfect. Looks like the next question is, how would you recommend doing social distancing at mealtime while maintaining proper supervision?
That's a great question. So I think if you're keeping your limit of children at 10 to 12, you're going to have 2 adults. You're going to need to have at least 2 adults in the room, and maybe every other chair. There's really not a lot of guidance yet around meal supervision. I think, though, doing what we can, we have to keep into consideration the safety of being able to get to children, within an arm's reach. So I think we need to consider that, and making sure that if the class size is smaller, there'll be fewer children to distance that way, and just keeping best practice and policy in place for that.
Okay, good deal. Our next question is from Jill Barnett. How do we help our families not abuse the health and wellness policies?
I'm assuming that means bringing a child who's sick anyway, perhaps, is that?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not really sure about the meaning of that question. So what I would say is I think it's really important that we just reiterate with our families that the health and safety policies are extremely important right now. They've always been important, but they're really something that we have to follow the guidelines for now more than anything. And I feel like I hope that most families, and I think they will, are going to abide by those policies if they can.
All right. Oh,
yes.
I had some difficulties. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Can I expand on that one a little bit,
Sure,
Heather?
sure.
I just want to say that as we prepare our policies, our individual policies or your individual policies to address the prevention of COVID-19 within your, specific centers, I would certainly encourage everyone to be very detailed about your policies, your specific policies, and recognize that it is expected, or I would think it would be expected, that policies may from time to time be modified because we're dealing in certainly uncharted waters. And once you develop your policies, share them with your parents, and make sure that it's always been my rule of thumb to not compromise your policies, and to because they give guidance to your to how the expectations within your organization. And I've always felt that policies really protect us. So I would certainly, just want to add to what Heather said, and certainly thank Heather for such an excellent presentation regarding the health and safety during this time. But I would just really want to kind of encourage everyone to be very specific and very detailed in terms of establishing your policies based on or to prevent COVID-19 based on CDC guidelines, and share those policies with your families. And I have found from listening to feedback from a few providers that families sometimes initially don't understand why they may not be allowed to come on the inside of the facility, but once they are provided with that information and shared in a very compassionate manner, they're open and willing to comply. So.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that input, Angela. So just to jump back over to some of our questions from our viewers. Let's see here. This may be a question for Heather or Ariel. Does DOE, I assume that means Department of Education, does DOE plan on using these rules for volunteer pre-K classrooms?
I'm going to punt to Heather. I have not heard. I think DOE is trying to figure their own stuff out right now.
They are. I was going to punt back to Ariel. So I think that we are still waiting to get some guidance specific around voluntary pre-K. Okay. I imagine that they're going to fall back on the CDC rules, as has most states.
Okay.
And I just add that we don't know what's going to happen to the school system next year, so right. They are still trying to determine what their next steps are. So they've got a couple months to figure it out that we don't. So they are probably going to be learning from y'all jumping in right now too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see here. Next question. Any recommendations around alternating children on different days of the week in the same space?
that is a recommendation, a strategy to use. And so if you're going to alternate, like a certain set come on Monday, Wednesday, certain Tuesday, Thursday, that you sanitize and clean the room in between.
All right, perfect. Next question, how long will these changes be recommended for, and will there be a possibility of going back to normal?
These policies are recommended for as long as we need them. We hope that there's a normal, but we don't know. So it could be quite a while. There are many factors in play here. So I think we should be prepared to follow these guidelines for quite a while.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, this is all part of the phase 1 reopening across the country, and particularly across our state. So a lot of this is going to depend on how we continue to watch the rate of infections. So if as a community and as a city and as a state, we are able to flatten the curve, then there is a greater likelihood that we'll be able to return to normal. But there's also the possibility that if we start to see another surge or spike in cases, that these things that we're recommending now, these safeguards, might be in play for a lot longer, and they might get more strict. Next question, in looking at class sizes, 10 is recommended, but is that set? What about low numbers, but a range of say 10 to 12?
So again, 10 is a recommendation. It is not something that will be cited through licensing rules. I know that. And you can do 10 to 12. It is really your decision as the owner, director of your program. But the recommendation is 10 to 12.
Okay. Next question, how are programs preparing for subs? And then the follow-up to that is, we are concerned about vulnerable staff or those that do not have childcare that may access FMLA.
I think you have to prepare for subs like you would normally, just making sure the guidelines are in place and making sure if you use a sub on a regular basis, you need to have a policy in place on how you're going to introduce that sub into your setting, what you're going to have them do. And I would almost consider, I would personally consider making sure I keep the same sub and maybe not sharing subs around to make, you're going to have a policy in place. Ariel, have you guys talked about that?
No, I mean, this is one of I think we are all, so many of the questions that y'all are bringing up are places where there truly is no right answer. I mean, we have to have enough teachers in the classroom to keep children safe. And also, we want there to be stable adults in the room so that we're not creating more exposures. And those two things are not, they're contradictory to one another, because if somebody has to be out for whatever reason, you still have to have coverage. So I think Heather's right, having policies in place, trying to use the same subs, so limiting your sub pool. I know that there weren't enough subs to begin with before this happened, so I know that's a concern for everyone. And these are all great questions that just, we're kind of, all of us trying to navigate how to create answers out of two contradictory recommendations.
I can also say that substitutes are covered under the Operations Support Grant. So through the Department of Human Services relief grants that you can access, substitute money to pay for substitutes is available through those recovery grants as well.
And I also found out a couple of days ago a creative way that two home providers are working together to share substitute, particularly since it is now allowable for providers or workers who have been approved or gone through the criminal history check within 90 days. And so they are sharing a couple of folks and using them as substitutes. And and I thought that was a real, creative way of doing that, and taking advantage, if you will say, of the policy that says that the licensing policy that allows for caregivers or teachers to move from one site to another if they've been tested, or if they have passed the criminal history background check within a 90-day period. So there are, folks are talking to each other, as is evident from that particular situation, and trying to find creative ways to make that work in terms of substitution.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Looks like we have another question. For employees, and it looks like they mean teachers, for employees with chronic coughs that aren't COVID related and want to return to the classroom, do we allow those teachers to come back in this initial reopening phase?
I think you need to have a policy in place around that. So either you, as an owner, you decide whether or not you're going to ask for a doctor's note that says that this is a chronic cough due to allergies. I have allergies. If this pollen would ever go away, people wouldn't stare at me sneezing and coughing. I wouldn't be like, promise, it's just allergies. So wearing a PPE, because if they have a chronic cough, and at least if they're wearing a PPE, they're covering their cough and preventing the particles from their cough to get released in the air. So you need to decide what your policy is going to be about and whether or not you're going to allow them to come back. But at the very least, making sure that they have a covering that goes over the nose as well as the mouth. There is a proper way to wear PPE. And if you're not going to, it's hard to breathe in. So you need to make sure that people have their nose covered. Otherwise, really, you're just missing the point of wearing it. Scheduling time for your staff to have a safe place they can go where they can remove the mask and just breathe, to then come back into the classroom, of course, after washing their hands. Proper way to take it off. You're not going to grab it right in the front because then you've just contaminated your hands. But so all those things have to be considered as you open back up.
All right, very good. And then the only thing that I would add to that is, again, remember, if you have employees that have chronic medical conditions that you think would put them more at risk of developing serious illness for COVID-19, you will want to think very carefully about whether or not you allow them to come back to work at this point. We have a ton of questions, and so we want to make sure that we respond to as many questions as possible. So we're going to go over by a few minutes if Heather has the time, and she's a little flexible. And we appreciate everyone's patience, but we're going to try to get to everybody's questions because we got to do it for the kids. All right, let's see here. Next question. If we have children with chronic health conditions, do we need to recommend they remain at home?
I would think you would want to work with the family on that and recommend that, especially in this first phase.
I'd also say what I want to, the flip side of this is that we are having conversations with the chamber about working with employers to help them understand the necessity of family-friendly workplace policies right now. So that family, what we don't want is that family to end up not having a job because they don't have childcare, right? So what we also need to be, we need to be doing two sides of the coin, working with y'all to have healthy practices in your programs and working with employers so that they have family-friendly workplace policies so that people can stay employed through this. So we're working on the flip side of that too, guys.
Perfect. All right, what would the morning health check look like? How should we protect ourselves when taking temperatures?
So that's a really great question. And the CDC has additional guidelines, but just real quickly, you're going to want to make sure you have a thermometer where you're not actually touching, that you can try to find one that is done from a distance. I think they use a laser process, that you're washing your hands in between, but you're not actually touching the child to take a temperature. It's something that's done at the distance, and that you have a set of questions that you ask. But I would highly suggest that you go through the CDC's website, which will be shared at the end of this on the, they're going to share that information, but go look at their the steps that they suggest you take.
Okay, good deal. Next question is, this may be more of a sort of a bureaucratic question. Who is our governing agency? Who tells us when we can open and who can shut us down? Is this different for camps versus school or aftercare versus school? How can we find this information?
I'm going to start, and then if Heather and Angela want to jump in. So your governing body is either Department of Human Services, Childcare Licensing, or DOE, depending on who holds your license. That being said, in the state of emergency, Mayor Burke invoked his authority under the executive order to close childcare inside city limits, except for those serving essential personnel. So there are times in during a crisis that mayors and governors can use exceptional authority that overrides your kind of typical operating practices, because there is such a need for an immediate call to action. And if that does not clarify it, put it in the chat and we will try to get better answers for you.
And I would just add to Ariel's point that also during times of emergency, our health department has a tremendous amount of authority in terms of making health decisions that are relative to businesses and organizations. Heather, did you want to add anything else?
No, I think you covered that beautifully.
Okay. This is probably going to be our last question, and then I promise that we'll follow up with an email to sort of get to the questions that we weren't able to get to today. Thinking about social, emotional, and speech language development, what are thoughts about using clear face shields as ways to protect our teachers but give our kiddos an opportunity to learn facial effect and support speech development?
So that is a concern, and one that we're all very well aware of in the early childhood realm for development. What I will say is that the recommendation, if you are going to wear a face shield, is that you also wear a face mask underneath it, because the shield, because this is an airborne illness, the particles are in the air and can get through the shield. But it is a consideration that that you need to think about. And I saw two questions, I think, that I just want to answer real quick.
Sure.
Would we recommend children wearing face masks while running and playing outside? Outside, no. In running and around, no. You do not want to do that. Really, the face masks are for inside, close contact areas. Outside, you do not want them to do that. And then there was one about, will teachers and children be required to get a COVID test prior to reentry? That is your decision as a business owner. That is not a requirement of the Department of Human Service, DOE, or the Department of Health. And I don't think for you guys, this is the city, that is a decision you have to make as a business owner. But I wanted to put those two. And then, I'm sorry, we need to get off this, but will we be seeing emergency care rules, or will this flexibility remain in place? I can say that I think that as the Department of Human Services and DOE work together on their rules, if you stay connected and visit their website every evening, they update they have child care provider updates that go up every day, and anything that changes, they're going to put that out, and you will also receive an email from the Department of Human Services with any major changes for child care providers. I just wanted to touch on those real fast.
Sure, no problem. Well, thank you so much. Let's see here. I really appreciate the presentation, Heather. Thank you, Ariel and Angela, for your contributions today. And thank you, Brooke, for keeping us on task. Let's see here. Brooke, do we have the additional slide? Yes, there we go. So just a couple of pointers. If you have specific questions sort of regarding your workplace, about health conditions in your workplace, health conditions in your business, the primary point of contact is going to be the Director of Environmental Health for the Health Department, which is Bonnie Deacons. Her number, or the number to the Health Department, is up there on the screen. We also encourage people to read through the Tennessee Pledge guidelines that have been put out by the governor's office. around the restarting of businesses during this first phase. And then if you have any questions for myself or for Brooke Satterfield or for Ariel or for Heather, you can reach out to me and Brooke, and we will try to get those questions answered. We have some other webinars coming up, including one this afternoon about gyms and exercise facilities. So Brooke and I will be back on here to talk about how you get in shape safely and not spread COVID-19 in the process. And then in the coming weeks, we've got other webinars set up. So thank you to everyone for attending. I really wish that we could have gone longer because we know we have a ton of interest and a ton of questions. And I just want to thank Heather and Ariel and Angela and for doing such a great job. And thank you all for tuning in and for spending the last hour with us today. So y'all have a great day, and we'll follow up with an email with all of your questions, and we will be sure to post this webinar on our webpage so that you can watch the recording. All right, y'all take care.